Hey everyone, Nicole Steckline, technical agronomist for DeKalb Asgrow in Northeast Iowa. The question you've all been wondering, end of August. The other question you've all been wondering is, what about fungicide in 2019? So right now it is 78 degrees in the end of July, which is great for me. It's great for you, it's great for the corn, and it's great for the fungus among us. So let's hop into the field and see what we can see. So I didn't have to travel very far before I ran into this guy. Northern corn leaf blight. So right here we're looking at a mature northern corn leaf blight lesion. We've got that cigar shape, tan colored lesion. This is a mature lesion. What I've been seeing the last week or so has been more immature lesions. So we're looking at that much smaller, not quite as wide, almost more of a gray to green color as opposed to this definite tan color. So the thing about northern corn leaf blight is I'm seeing more immature lesions, but it doesn't take long to get to be a big boy. So latent period is very short in northern corn leaf blight, looking at more like 2 weeks as opposed to 3 weeks like gray leaf spot. So from the time of infection to putting off spores, we're looking at about 2 weeks, especially if you're given the right weather conditions. So like I said earlier, it's 78 degrees right now, and the next 10 days looks to be about mid to lower 80s. We've been having a lot of heavy dews, and then we've also got the opportunity for rain in the forecast as well. So we've got great northern corn leaf blight growing conditions. The other thing that's a little bit concerning is that of the northern corn leaf blight that I'm finding, most of it, this one is actually ear leaf, most of it has been mid to upper canopy. So this stuff is ripe and in the position to very quickly infect the upper canopy and start taking away yield. So a lot of times when you're looking for this stuff, if you go charging through the field, you're gonna miss a lot of it. But if you walk through slow and stop and just look around, a lot of times you'll find it kind of on this lower part of the leaf there, but also where that leaf kind of starts to overturn, because that's where the coalescing water from these heavy dews, that's where it will kind of group together and sit. And one of the things that northern corn leaf blight likes is to have that free water sitting on the leaf so it continue to grow and develop and infect new leaf tissue. So keep an eye on northern corn leaf blight. I am starting to see more of that than what I was last year, and with each passing day, more and more as we go on. Something else that we see commonly is common rust. Now, I point this one out not because it's usually a big deal. It actually got a little bit too hot for it, but because of that, it's actually making it start to look a little bit like gray leaf spot. So typically when we think about, the common rust, we're thinking about that powdery brick red coloration. But what I've got here is some common rust lesions that are no longer producing because it got so hot here in the last couple of weeks. So when we look at this, it almost looks like it could start becoming a gray leaf spot lesion. But if we look at it correctly, we can see where it had ruptured the tissue, the leaf tissue, to put out that pustule and put out spores. So it'll kind of turn more of that gray color. So looking really fast, it might look like gray leaf spot, but it's just a old common rust spot that's no longer producing. So as I was saying before on the northern corn leaf blight, how the immature lesions can look slightly different than the mature lesions, I was lucky, when I came in the field to start looking for some gray leaf spot, which is not hard to find, I stumbled across this immature northern corn leaf blight lesion. So as you can see, obviously it's smaller. We're looking at that 2 to 3 inches, but you can see kind of that water marking on the edge, those leading edges, where, when we think about the water marking on Goss's wilt, it's kind of going to show that here, where we see the infection continuing to progress. It just hasn't killed that leaf tissue quite yet. So this guy is going to continue to get bigger and hopefully not give us too many issues later. But as it's going to increase in incidence, probably need to be thinking about fungicide application. As I've mentioned, gray leaf spot, not hard to find this year. So just want to give you guys a couple of examples of what the gray leaf spot is going to look at in different stages. So if we look at this part of the leaf right here, it doesn't have that typical rectangular shape that you think about when you think about gray leaf spot, because it will be longer and tan in color, but it's not going to go outside. It won't be able to go past the veins in that leaf, so it gives us that rectangular lesion. But when you look at these immature lesions here, they aren't big enough to be hitting the veins of that leaf. So they're just going to kind of give you that dark leaf color with a yellow halo around it, and then it will continue to progress a little bit bigger until you finally end up with those longer sides there, giving you that typical rectangular shape when you think about gray leaf spot. So this is a really typical gray leaf spot lesion right there. Very easy to find. In the lower canopy, we've got a lot of lesions coming. So we've got a lot of lesions here, gray leaf spot, that are going to be putting off spores to continue infection, finding quite a few mature as well as immature lesions at the ear leaf and above. So when we look at the weather forecast, we are looking at having those heavy dews, and then in the 80s, while gray leaf spot does tend to like it a little bit warmer than northern corn leaf blight does, those mid 80s are going to be just fine for gray leaf spot. So a hot topic at a lot of the winter meetings this last year was tar spot. And are we seeing much of it? So I'm actually standing in the patient 0 field from 2016, where we first identified tar spot in Iowa. And I'm just not seeing a whole heck of a lot out here. When we think about last year when we had a lot of tar spot, it was much cooler and it was much wetter through this part of the growing season. And I think the temperature had a lot to do with it. That hot and dry 90+ degrees really helped to suppress its growth. But I am seeing some of it out there. So when we're looking at tar spot, if you can see this little one there, that's a tar spot baby. And then we've got another small one right here. So tar spot, small and black. Been getting a lot of questions and pictures that, you know, is this tar spot, is it not? And a lot of it ends up being fly poo. So frass, if we want to be technical. But if you can see these black spots here, one of my analogies for identifying tar spot actually this last year has been comparing it to fly specks. Now, if you want to tell if you've got fly specks or if you've got tar spot, fly specks will wash off, tar spot will not. So as we cool down, maybe we get a little bit more moisture. We know that we have tar spot out here. We just aren't seeing it explode like we have in the last 2 years or so. So to be seen yet whether we need to treat for it specifically, but we'll keep an eye on it for you. A corn disease that's been interesting to watch increase in prevalence and significance across northeast Iowa since about 2012-2011 is Physoderma brown spot. So we got Physoderma brown spot. It's a little bit of a different cat of what you think about with your fungal diseases. So we've got two phases of this disease, which would be the Physoderma brown spot on the leaves, and then the Physoderma node breakage, which is going to happen later on in the season, and what is the real concern with this disease. So it's a little bit of a different cat, where what you see on the leaves right now is what you've got. So this infection occurs about V3 to V6 inside the whorl when we've got free water, because these little guys have flagella, so they need to be able to swim around in that free water in the whorl, which is when they do their infection. The other interesting thing is that it requires light to make the infection, which is why we see this banding across. So you can see this is the daylight where it infects across the leaf. It also infects the midrib, unlike something like eye spot that's only going to do that leaf tissue. So we've got infection during the day. Here we've got dark during the night, infection during the day. So you can actually see what your growth rate of the corn is by how wide these bands are. So these lesions right here, this is infected tissue. What you see is what you've got. these are not going to continue to sporulate or anything like that because it's a zoospore. It's not like these other fungal diseases like gray leaf spot or northern corn leaf blight. So what we see is what we've got right now. However, what it is a really good indicator that we've got this pathogen in the field. This isn't going to take up a whole lot of yield, and spraying a fungicide on it right now isn't going to do anything. Another thing that I'm seeing a fair amount of this year is, again, we've got that banding. Here is Physoderma brown spot. This is not on the stalk. This is actually the infection of the leaf sheath tissue. So if you pull the sheath off of this plant, you can see that the infection is not actually on the stalk. So the second phase, really the more problematic phase, is Physoderma node breakage. It's not a rot because it's not actually rotting out the pith like when we think about anthracnose stalk rot. But when we start looking at this later on in the season, it's going to be in some of these bottom nodes, and it will actually infect that nodal tissue. So what we'll want to be looking for is that actual brown tissue in that node going around there. So what will happen is it will continue to infect the actual node, and then if that circle makes it all the way around, when you hit it with a corn snoot, or if you get a wind at the right time, at the right direction, it can snap that plant off, creating an unharvestable ear. So now we're down to decision time. Do we pull the trigger or not? We've got probably about another 2 weeks before we make that decision. Our best fungicide applications where you're going to make the most money on them is going to be made between VT, or full tassel, and R3, which is milk stage. So by the time we get to dough, that's when our likelihood of getting a return on investment off of that dollar spent starts to decrease, just because we don't have as much grain fill period that we can influence. So this corn right here, we are in R3. So R3 is milk stage. So when we pull that ear open and squish those kernels, we're getting plenty of milk out of there. When we transition to R4, which is really when we should start cutting off those applications, that's when you squeeze those kernels and it's more of a paste than it is a liquid milk in there. So that's when we start to cut off those fungicide applications. When it comes to diseases, I'm looking mostly at gray leaf spot and northern corn leaf blight, both because of their current presence in cornfields right now, as well as the next 10 days when most of these applications are going to be getting made. We've got great potential both for grain fill, for our yield potential, as well as great potential for fungal growth. So get out there, scout your field, see what you've got both in terms of disease pressure as well as yield potential. And as always, call, text, or email with questions.